yay, man. All out of options, nothing to choose. I pissed out on Netflix, I'm sick of the news. I'd sign up to Sky, but I don't wanna pay. I've been on furlough since May. Never go and listen to a Cockney attitude. Ooh, breaking away. Got to find a better way. I'd rather watch Auf Wiedersehen again and listen to what Hazel had to say.
Hello, and welcome back to Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast, and this is episode number 15, and Ally Pet, or as they say in Wolverhampton, alright spunk, something along those lines. So, this is episode 15 of the podcast, George, and we are back again for our beautiful, loyal listeners and followers. And I've got another fantastic email in today.
Really? All right.
Got a bit of a shout out to a chap called Rob Evans. So Rob Evans sent us in a nice email complimenting the podcast. And so we thought that was worthy of a bit of a shout out. So if anybody else would like a bit of a shout out on the podcast, then please do communicate with us on one of the various channels that we have. So after the shout out, George, in fact, no, I'm expecting big things this week, George. Tell me, how's it been going for you?
Yeah, pretty good. I was down in Cornwall in Newcastle, mixing in with the surfer crowd, trying to blend in, but looking too fat. But it was great. Packed down there, absolutely packed. Very good though. I got sunburned, so my head is like flaking now. Like, do you remember that show, The Singing Detective, where his skin's all flaking? So I'm flaking everywhere. So yeah.
But you, the whitest ginger man going, what, got yourself sunburn? No.
Oh, yeah. 5-10 minutes, I'm burning up red, Really good, hot down there. Yeah, it's nice though.
But some of the food looked really good. You were like where you were staying and all that. You were.
Well, in my hotel, it was a Michelin star restaurant. Yeah. So I treated myself there every night, and crab spaghettis and But for a hotel, it wasn't that too expensive actually. It was they didn't sort of rip you off, for the food and the drink. It's the same. The drink was like a pint was £5.55. It's about the same as you pay around here in Camden. Yeah. So a top class place, but they're quite reasonable, with their prices and that.
Fuck, I mean, you're quite reasonable. That sent a shiver down my spine. That £5.50 for a pint, robbing bastards.
It was nearly $2,000 to stay there though for 5 days.
Really?
Yeah, £400 a night. Yeah.
Fucking no way.
Yeah, 300 and.
But you could have went to Thailand for fucking a month for that.
No, but when you go in there initially, you pay for all your time. So I paid the money, and then they said, "Oh, Mr. Bradley, we have to. There's a charge. We take £50 just for incidentals, because you can sign for everything in these hotels, can't you?" So I thought that's fair enough, but they didn't take £50. They took 250. Good, £50 a day. But I didn't spend any of it. I thought, I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to just pay as I go, and I'll get my 250 when I leave. They said it goes back in my bank account, but I haven't had it yet. So I've been waiting since Monday.
Yeah, sometimes it'll take a week and that for that crap.
Yeah.
It takes a week to 10 days sometimes to get your dough back. So, well, you had yourself with $2,000, mate. Fucking hell. Gee, £400 a night for a hotel.
It was about 395. But I mean, obviously you pay for it, but I mean, you're treated like a royalty there, but you are paying for it. But it was nice. I enjoyed it. I don't begrudge it. I mean, beautiful place. And then the last day I was there, all the Top Gear BBC lot signed in. Had all the flash cars outside, the Aston Martins and the bloody all Porsches, and Freddie Flintoff was in there. I've seen him, but I didn't see any of the other ones. But it's good.
Wouldn't recognise them if they fucking kicked me in the bollocks. So I mean, Freddie Flintoff I would, but like I don't never haven't watched an episode of Top Gear since Clarkson left.
Well, that's the same. I've only seen bits of it. It's sort of lost it now. They've done it to death, haven't they?
Yeah, and then even when Clarkson was there, it wasn't like my favourite program. I'm not a fucking I'm not a big car.
Well, like when they done the Vietnam one, that was the one that made me go to Vietnam after watching that. So.
You know, the specials are a bit different because they're really funny, aren't they? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so I quite enjoy the specials. They did one recently, didn't they? Where it's not Top Gear anymore, but what the Grand Tour or whatever on Amazon.
Yeah.
And I watched that. So, but again, it's it is what it is. It's not exactly it's not my favorite cup of tea. But yes. So I was back on the microphone on Saturday night.
I've seen that. Yeah,
seeing a boxing show on Saturday night. So for the first time in 18, let's just for the sake of argument, 18 months. First time in a year and a half since just under a year and a half since I've done a boxing show. So that was good to get back in the saddle. It was quite local as well, which is always good. So got things flowing in the right direction. And went down to see our friends at Top Gun Tattooing. Got a little bit of a touch up on me sleeve.
No Neville and Lottie then, no?
No Neville. Well, unfortunately, the top of both of my arms are full, George. So I would get it done. I would, but I can't. So George,
I see.
It's down to you. It is.
Get a free pass then, yeah.
It is down to you. Went to see our friends at Top Gun Tattooing last week and got a bit of a touch up, and was in the gym on when was it? Must have been Tuesday, and so it was really, really hot in the boxing gym and got bitten by some insect in my forehead. So I've got like a big fucking red lump on my forehead, look like an absolute fucking.
I've seen the advert for your forthcoming appearance as well on the.
This yes, exactly. So this was released. The information was released to me yesterday. So the podcast that I did with Sean Atwood is to be released on the 17th. Or was it the 17th of June? Yeah, I think it was the 17th of June.
I'm interested. I'm looking forward to hearing about the in Marbella, the boiler room, because I entered there, didn't I?
You did.
When I met you the day I arrived.
You came and met me there. So to be honest, there wasn't that much. I didn't talk that much about Marbella because it sounds weird. There was there wasn't that much. It wasn't really that interesting what happened there. It was just we worked in a sales room and what have you. But it was Indonesia where
I had quite an interesting time there when I was there.
Well, yeah, I mean, outside of I mean, don't get me wrong, drugs and booze, drugs and women. But the thing about it is because I spent so long, attempting to get reach oblivion with drugs, booze and women. A lot of the stories that some people may think are interesting, I just think, it was just a normal day for me. You know what I mean? I spent a long time, as an active, alcoholic and an addict, and some days and situations that a normal person might consider, absolutely outrageous. That was just a Tuesday. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, I spoke about Marbella and Lineker's, working in Lineker's and stuff like that. But like I said,
what was the bar? The bar we used to go to, the Bubbles or something? What was it called?
Bubbles.
No, was it
Bubbles? Yeah, Bubbles in Marbella Port. So, that was oh god, that was an absolute den of shit houses, wasn't it? You know what I mean? It was just you couldn't throw a fucking stone in there without hitting a cocaine dealer in the head. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think everyone was in the same boat in that bar.
Oh, yeah, it was just booze and drugs. So, but yeah, so it was, not a bad little week. And to top it all off, yesterday, Wendy's opened in Reading.
Oh.
Yesterday. And so me and my kid went down to Wendy's and had triple cheeseburgers and Wendy's.
Yeah, I know Wendy's well. In the 90s, when I actually had girlfriends, long-term girlfriends, my one girlfriend was area manager for the West End of Wendy's. Oh, right. So I was eating there all the time for nothing.
Oh, really? Well,
yeah, Sandra. If she's listening, hello, Sandra. Lives in Australia now.
Hello.
She's married to a woman.
Oh, right. Well, is that what you did? You turned her off, men, George?
Yeah. She got married to this, quite a nice bird, actually. She's lovely, yeah.
Well,
so, I'll tell her to watch.
I can imagine, George, that spending any time with you would make you want to turn to the opposite sex.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she got married a couple of years ago. So, she's loving it out there.
Well, fair play to her. And if there is anybody out there that has got the ability to provide free Wendy's burgers, please do get in touch. So, as always, if you have any support to offer, constructive criticism, praise and or abuse for either myself or George, please do get in contact with the podcast via email on Auf Wiedersehen Again @gmail.com. That's Auf Wiedersehen Again @gmail.com. Our Instagram, please do follow us on Instagram @Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. That's Instagram @Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Our Twitter is @Auf Again. That's Twitter @Auf Again. Our Facebook page, please do like and share the Facebook page, which is Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And if you could click the subscribe button and click the bell, and what that will do is that will alert you to any new episodes. However, if you prefer not to look at mine and George's beautiful faces and you prefer to listen on audio only, you can do so on all good podcast platforms. We are available on Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, Google Podcast Breaker, and many, many more. And please do remember that new episodes are released every Friday at 10 a.m. Our theme music, as always, is composed and performed by the guitar man Lee Dosky. And we do please ask that regardless of whichever channel you tune into the podcast, please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And our new sponsorship deal still hasn't been inked, so we are still currently being sponsored by the fantastic guys at Top Gun Tattooing, which is number 12, the Harris Arcade in Reading. Their website is topguntattoo.co.uk. Their phone number is 01189 968 667. And as always, we've got a couple of fantastic offers for our listeners. Offer number one is you are entitled to a 20% discount off the value of any tattoo by going to see Zach. And the code word for the 20% discount with Zach is Hadaway and Shite Man. So you have to contact Zach by either in person at number 12, the Harris Arcade in Reading, or on the telephone, and you say, "Hi Zach, I'm a listener of the podcast, and Hadaway and Shite Man, I want my 20% discount." And Zach has decided to get himself a dermal facial piercing and looks like an absolute fucking idiot. So please do tell Zach he looks like an absolute bellend when you speak to him. And all on top of that, the world exclusive offer that we provide for all of our listeners is a free, yes, that is right, a free tattoo from Top Gun Tattooing. Everybody's entitled to one free tattoo. Terms and conditions apply. The terms and conditions are that you get the Neville and Lottie tattoo on your arm. So if you would like a free tattoo, all you have to do is emulate young Neville and you will be provided with a free tattoo. Oh, with it, we've got our new giveaway, George. So, a second, it's just over here. Let me just step off camera for 1 second and let me retrieve the giveaway. And we can set up the new giveaway for our listeners. So, new giveaway competition, George. Giveaway. So, we have a special signed copy picture of the cast from series 3. So this was provided to me by Mr. Graham Teasdale. So Graham is the admin of the unofficial Facebook page, the unofficial Auf Wiedersehen Pet Facebook page, and the Jimmy Nail Appreciation Society Facebook page. So Graham used to, I don't know if he still does, used to be able to buy signed copy pictures of the cast, and I have the, well, in fact, I'll show you. Hold on, I've got it here. Let me just so on my mantelpiece, there we go, on my mantelpiece.
And this makes it makes an appearance in this show as well, doesn't it?
Yeah,
this one.
So there we go. So look, on my mantelpiece, I have a framed and signed copy of the Magnificent Seven. So that is available on the this was something that Graham used to sell, and I'm sure he used to donate the profits to charity or what have you. So when I bought my framed and signed copy picture of the Magnificent Seven, Graham also included a signed copy of the cast of series 3. So as you can see, if you can let me just, so there's the guys, and as you can see, all of the genuine signatures copied are on this picture. So if you would like to win this signed photograph of all the cast copy, then you can do so with our new giveaway competition. So what we are going to do is, as always, we will set up some posts on our social media channels. So on Instagram, Twitter, and the Facebook page, we will post a giveaway post. And what do you need to do in order to win? Well, it's a very, very good question. And the answer is very simple. You need to follow the social media channel. You need to like the post. You need to tag 3 of your friends in the post. And you need to share the post itself. So obviously on Facebook, just share it to your wall. On Twitter, retweet the post. And on Instagram, share it to your story and tag us in the story. And we will be running this for the next few weeks, and you could win this genuine signed copy of the cast of Series 3 with all absolute genuine copied signatures onto the photograph there. So what an absolutely fantastic prize, and that will be sent out in a few weeks to our winner. So there we go, George. That is all of the boring stuff over. So here we go on to Series 2, Episode 2. Oh, my coffee machine's about to make a noise again. The coffee machine's back, kicking up.
I had one of those in my hotel room. Was it Nespresso?
Nespresso, yeah.
Oh, I loved it.
Mine's one of them industrial size ones. It makes a right old racket. Anyway, so let's try that again. So, Series 2, Episode 2, The Return of the Seven, Part 2.
Part 2.
So this was first broadcast on the 28th of February, 1986. And we are going to go over one of the co-stars later on when she makes her first appearance.
Yeah.
Who is young Hazel, Barry's fiance.
Hazel Redfern.
Yeah, we've got an interesting fact about young Hazel, which blew me away. So there's a bit of Hazel trivia. It will be revealed, and there are several locations that we are also going to point out throughout the episode. So they used, obviously, because I don't know if you're aware. So for series 2, you know, it wasn't filmed at Elstree anymore. It was filmed in the middle. It was filmed in Nottingham, basically.
Yeah.
So that's why. So in series 1, a lot of the locations that they used were within the vicinity of Elstree Studios. So like and Bushy and other places in Hertfordshire, Smith, etc., etc. Now, in series 2, obviously, because they're in Nottingham, a lot of the locations are in and around Nottingham. But they also do go back and they also do use locations in Newcastle for a couple of the scenes when Dennis is back in Newcastle. So we will point those out along the way. So the episode opens up and basically carries on from where we left off last week. So the episode opens up and it is in Barry's house. And obviously, if you remember last week, Moxie had just arrived.
Yeah.
So Moxie had turned up and he'd broken into the house and made himself a fry up and he was hiding upstairs. And then the lads came back and they grabbed Moxie and anyway, so they're getting the Moxie update on what's happening. Now, obviously, at this stage, you and I and the viewers know that Moxie is on the run from the shovel because in the opening sequence, in the opening titles, we see him going over the wall, and so he's been a little bit cagey about what he's up to. So he tells everyone. So they're in Barry's house. They're sitting in the living room, and Moxie says after Germany, things were just as desperate as ever in the UK, and I got into a spot of bother. He doesn't actually say what the spot of bother is, but we're gonna assume.
I don't know if it involved matches again, but
that was it. I was gonna say I'm gonna assume something got burnt, but I got into a spot of bother, so I joined the Merchant Navy for a while. And Neb says the Merchant Navy. He says yes, and he says, and Bomber says, "See the world, did you?" And he says, "I saw Bahrain twice and one really murderous night in Malta." And I couldn't sign off. I mean, Malta's never struck me as being a murderous place.
I've been there three times, Malta.
There's a friend of mine who does a lot of recruitment on Malta, and they go there all of the time.
Yeah, it's nice enough. Right. They love the English over there, which is quite rare.
Very close to Italy, isn't it?
Yes. I went to get a ferry to Sicily. And then it started raining, so I stopped.
All right. I was going to say it's just south of Sicily, isn't it, Malta?
It's about 2 hours on the ferry. You can get to Sicily from Malta.
All right. Well, there you go. Look at that. So, and then they're catching up, and Neb says, Barry's been in the Falklands, and Moxie says straight up, and he says, "I thought you were going to Saudi." And Barry says, "Yeah, I couldn't get there, could I? And I wouldn't have got breathalyzed there either." Well, he says, "I couldn't get there." Yes, because his bike blew up, and B, it was a 5,000-mile fucking trip. And he's obviously still whinging about being breathalyzed. And Nev says, "At least you saved enough to buy this place, get yourself set up in business." And Barry's whinging. He says, how can I run a business without a driving license, Neville? For a job in building, you've got to be mobile. You've got to be able to get from A to B. Bomber says, "Innocent until proven guilty, Barry." And he's, just being Mr. Negative. He's like, "Foregone conclusion, Bomb. It's all Wayne's fault. I'd never even heard of a penis colada until he..."
Penis colada, yeah.
And then so Dennis is sitting in the chair, absolutely carted, and he's obviously not paying attention to the conversation that's going on around him. And he just, out of nowhere, he just shouts, 300 quid, I reckon. And everyone's like, what? And he says, the damage to the Jag. And Neville says, well, don't blame me. And he says, well, who else am I supposed to blame? It was you that was behind the wheel, if I remember rightly. And Neville says, only because you're legless, you've been chucking the scotch back all night. And then Barry says, typical, isn't it? And I'm the one who gets breathalyzed. Because, I mean, Dennis is, as we discussed in the last episode, you know, he's definitely trying to find a bit of peace and solace in the bottom of that bottle.
Yeah.
And Moxie, hey, have you got a Jag, Den? And Den's, no, the bloke I work for's got a Jag. And Moxie says, bit tricky that. He says, and Wayne says, yeah, look, lads, I've just done the biz down the motel. They've got some rooms left. Who's in for a good night's kip? Dennis, aye, count me in. And Wayne's like, yeah, we can, we can resume this blissful reunion in the morning, eh? And Bomber's like, me too. And Barry's a bit offended. He says, I've got a bed for you upstairs, Bum. And he says, thanks, Barry, but Bomber's a big lad, needs a big bed.
Needs a big bed.
And Moxie straight away, no standing on ceremony. He's like, I'll have his then. And Dennis offers Neville to come. He says, are you coming, Nev? He says, no, I'd sooner stop here and save the money. Obviously, Nev is on an economy drive. Says, what about you, Barry? Do you want to lift down your mum's? And he says, no point. I wouldn't sleep anyhow. Mama says, right then, see you in the morning. And they all say goodbye. So Wayne then obviously talks about Barry, says, yeah, Nev, don't let him get on the phone to that Hazel, all right? Barry, we agreed. She's got to come to you, son. A bit of healthy disdain won't do any harm. Yeah. So Wayne is, you know, continuing with his fantastic advice about the ladies, even though we find out later on that his advice is not the one to follow. And Moxie says, still the expert then, Wayne. Still the expert then, Wayne, on affairs of the heart. Neville says he doesn't change. That's why he's went to the motel, because the two girls there, remember Pippa, young Pippa from the last episode. Moxie says, what two girls? And he says he only shows up with a couple of lasses he picked up on the motorway. Barry says, says to me on the phone, he's a change, and Barry's, you know, taking his changed character, me, married man. And Moxie says, Wayne, married? And he says, and Neville's dumbfounded as well. He says, never. He says, and Barry tells them, he says he married the German girl that he worked in the cycle, young Krista, the beautiful.
Oh, yes.
Who still hasn't returned my messages on Instagram.
Or mine.
She did like one of my comments, though. Did you see that?
Oh, did she? Oh,
yeah. Do you remember? She posted up a picture talking about Hollyoaks or something, and I posted from the Auf Wiedersehen Pet, the Auf Wiedersehen Again Instagram. I put, you will always be Krista.
Always be, yeah.
And she liked the comment. So we have been acknowledged that we do exist. Yeah. Now, how we get from there to getting her on as a guest, who knows?
Yeah.
But Barry says, don't you remember he was, and at this point, Moxie is at the window, looking out of the window suspiciously. So obviously Moxie's like, you know, he's on the run. He's worried that the old Bill are going to be after him, whatever. And so Moxie's looking out the window up and down the street, and Barry notices Moxie looking, and Barry's like, what the fuck? Yeah. Barry go, what's he doing? So Barry says, don't you remember he was very smitten at the time? And Moxie says, yeah, I know that, but getting married, it's bloody lunacy. And obviously Barry's just about to get married, so he's a bit offended at that. He says, excuse me, I'll be walking up the aisle myself any day now. And Moxie says, no offence there, Barry. It's just that, you know, Wayne is a bloke that can jump anything. Women find him attractive, whereas you... And that, you know, Barry's deeply offended. He's like, yes. He goes, and Moxie says, well, it wasn't meant to come out like that. And Barry says, I'm not a bloody gremlin, you know. Neville tries to placate the situation. He says, I think what Moxie means is that you're more naturally suited to marriage, the same as me. And this is where we spoke about, you brought this up last week, George, but this is where we confirm it. And Moxie says, you still married then, Nev? And he says, yeah, why shouldn't I be? And he says, no reason, like, it's just that, you know, the tattoo that you had with the other Judy's name on must have thrown a bit of a wobbler over that. Barry says, how did you explain that one away? And he says, well, I didn't. He says, I couldn't. I told her the truth. He says, well, sort of. I said that you lot got us drunk and held us down while they did it, and she believed us. Eventually, we just agreed never to mention it. Now, I mean,
but she's going to see it every day.
I still can't believe he doesn't just get the Neville and Lottie bit blacked out. Like you know, they just go to the tattoo shop and just have them go over it and just
colour it in,
just a heart, with a black, like it's, and you know, the names wouldn't be there, but you know, that would be too sensible, clearly. And so Moxie says, you know, very mature of you both. And Neville says, we've all had to grow up a bit. We all had to grow up a bit, didn't we? And he says, I've got a little Ben now. And Moxie says, really? And Barry's like, obviously, you know, Barry's a broken man at this point. And he sighs very deeply. He says, I'm a very different person from the one you knew in Dusseldorf. I saved me money. I bought this place. I started my own business. I learned elementary Spanish and I joined the SDP. And he goes, I've traveled. And I don't just mean the Falklands. Last year, Hazel and I took a villa in Gozo. I don't even know where that is.
Yeah, I've been to Gozo. That's by Malta, yeah.
Oh, is it in Malta, is it?
Yeah. It's lovely. It's sort of the rich part of Malta. All the big posh houses and everything.
Ah, right.
You got to take a boat over to it. It's about half an hour.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're here, George, for your geographical knowledge of Gozo. And Moxie says, you're obviously very upwardly mobile these days, Barry. You know, out of all of us, I reckon you're the one that's really got your life together. And he says, I did have until you locked up. And so he's, again, Barry's trying to, you know, blame his predicament on other people. So they obviously all go to bed, and the next morning we hear the phone ringing, and Neville runs upstairs, dressed in
his rather small pants.
In his pants and his suit jacket. And so he answers the phone. Hello, who is it? And he says, there's nobody here, I'm afraid. And obviously we know that we can tell that from the other end of the conversation that it is Norma. And she says, look, I'm trying to get a hold of Dennis Patterson. It's his sister, Norma, here. And obviously then Neville pipes up. I mean, you know, surely she would have recognised the Geordie accent. You know, she's rang a fucking house in Wolverhampton. Pick up the phone. She might have been a little bit like, oh, hello.
Is that Jimmy Nail's sister, is it?
It is, that's Jimmy Nail's. I mean, we talked about that in the last episode, so that is Jimmy Nail's sister in real life. And so anyway, she says, Norma, and so he says, Norma, this is Neville. And she says, oh, hello, Neville, thank goodness for that. Listen, can you get a hold of him fast? I've been trying to contact him since 6 o'clock last night. And he tells you, we were out in the town and Dennis grabbed a night in the hotel. She says, oh no, I've got to contact him. It's vital. The way and he says, Ally Fraser's been on. He's coming back unexpectedly. Get him to ring me urgently, will you? He says, I will do, Pet. I was going to have to, he says, I was going to have to phone him anyway, as he went off with all of my gear in his Jag. So that means that he drove that car, from Barry's to the hotel, completely, utterly fucking mortal drunk. So there is the way that it is, the amount of drink driving that he's done within, like later on we'll see, he's in the house and the first thing he does is grab the drink, and then he goes to the pub and he has a pint of double scotch, and then he goes back and has a drink, and then he gets in his car and drives. And it's just, the level of drink driving that's in, you just, if this was filmed today, there'd be fucking uproar about.
Exactly, yeah.
It was the 80s. It was, 5 and drive, I think, was the...
it's when it was fashionable back then. Yeah.
Exactly. And she says, well, just contact him fast. Try your best, Pet. And he says, try, darling. So, and then Barry, you see Barry's walking back down the road with a pint of milk. So they cut. And obviously Barry's still in his suit. So if you notice this.
Oh, the ridiculous suit. Oh.
So Barry was wearing his suit yesterday when he went to meet Hazel. Then the carnage ensued. He got drunk. He got breathalyzed, and then he stayed at the house, and he's still in the suit from the night before. And he doesn't actually get changed until later on. And I mean, he must be, it must be stinking. But anyway, so they cut to the hotel, and Dennis is obviously checking out, and Wayne appears. And he's like, all right, Den. He says, you're keen. And Dennis is like, what? And he says, to get to work. It's only 8:20. I wasn't planning on getting there till 10 myself. He says, no, I'm not going. My sister rang. I've got to shoot home. Back. And he says, nothing serious. He says, no, I've got to deal with something. Look, I tell you what, give Barry me apologies, will you? And I wish him all the best. Okay, mate. And he obviously he's very distracted. He realizes that he's in trouble with Ally. And he's like, hey, Den, he's like, nice to see you, mate. He's like, oh, sorry. Nice to see you too, mate. And they shake hands, and he walks off. And Wayne says, try and get back at the weekend. It might be a giggle. And the receptionist turns to Wayne and says, oh, sir. And he says, and she says, the two young ladies at room 216. And Wayne says, oh, yeah, could you give them a bell, please? Tell them I'm on my way to breakfast. And the receptionist says, well, they have checked out, sir. And Wayne's face is like, what? And she says, they've what? And she says, well, they've said that you will be paying the bill. So Wayne has got shafted. Wayne has got tucked right up by the young Pippa and her friend.
I think that I've got it right. That receptionist, I think she was in Spender. I think she's done quite a few things she's been in.
Really?
Unless I'm getting her mixed up with there's the girl later on who's at the hotel. Perhaps I wasn't entirely sure, but yeah.
Well, we shall see. To be honest, I didn't notice. I did. She did get a credit, I think.
Karen Clarkson, I think the name is.
All right. Okay. Well, she may well have done, mate. May well have done. So they cut back to Barry's house, and Neville and Moxie are sitting there eating toast, and Barry is looking dishevelled. And he says, he starts talking. He says, well, we're going to drive to the Highlands via the Lake District, you see. Our first night was to be at the Pheasant in Bathenswaite. So Bathenswaite, that's where we used to go on scout camp when we were kids, Lake Bathenswaite.
All right.
Spent many a summer camping near Lake Bathenswaite. And very, very beautiful part of the world it is. And he says, then up through Gretna Green, bypassing Glasgow, of course. Of course you'd bypass Glasgow. It's a crap hole. And hopefully we would have been in Oban by Monday night. And Neville's like, what's this, Barry? He says, the honeymoon. And he says, Neville says, there'll still be a honeymoon, man. That's not cancelled just because you turned up late to a Chinese restaurant. And Barry's like, how can I drive to the Highlands without a driving license, Neville? Hazel can't drive with a gear lever. She passed her test in an automatic metro. Neville says, that case will not come up for ages. My cousin Eric got done. He wasn't in court for 4 months. And Moxie's like, instead of, Moxie's been a bit of a bell end here, Neville's trying to, put his mind at ease. And Moxie's like, well, that's up your way, though. I reckon there's a perpetual backlog of drunks up there. And Barry says he's right. Justice is swifter in these parts. Neville's swift and merciless. I mean, he's been done for drink driving. If he, it depends on how over the limit he was, but chances are he might get off with it if it's his first offence and he wasn't that. It's not like he was 10 times over the limit or whatever. Anyway, Neville says you'll get your honeymoon in, I guarantee it. And Barry says if she still wants me, I better get round there and sort things out. And Moxie says Wayne said you shouldn't gives her the upper hand according to him. Yeah. And Neville just says, look, Barry should do what he wants to. Barry should just do what he thinks is best. Barry says he's right. I'm not listening to the advice of Wayne Norris anymore. I used to do that in Germany, and it only ever led to disaster. Thinking back to when they were after the Swedish stewardesses, by the sounds of things.
Yeah.
And Neville says, do you want us to make a start? And Barry says, Trevor will be round in a minute. He knows what has to be done. I can't think. So Barry leaves, and he leaves with his mug, and then he leaves it out on the wall, and he's looking even more dishevelled, and Neville and Moxie watch him as he's leaving. And then we see Dennis flying up the motorway on the way back to Newcastle to try and get there in time for Ally. And Dennis also has a brush with the law. Called for speeding. And then we see... we see that Wayne, before that, we see that Wayne is driving
with Bomber. Yeah.
He's driving back, and he's driving back with Bomber, and he says, and Bomber says, sorry I missed them, scarcely said a word to him last night, and they're talking about Dennis's alcohol intake. He says, well, none of us did. He was that pissed. And Bomber says, he never used to knock it back like that, not scotch anyhow. And Wayne says, he never used to drive a Jag, did he? And then Bomber says, well, you can't complain. Fancy motor this. And Wayne says, well, I earned it. He says, didn't I, Bomber? He says, a little present after 6 bleeding months in the Arctic Circle. So Wayne, as you know, was married. And then, as we now find out, 6 months of that supposed marriage, he's then done the flit to the Arctic Circle to work up there, leaving his beautiful wife. And Bomber says, good money. Then he says, yeah, but it weren't just that. There was nowhere to bleed and spend it, was there? He says, I mean, do you know our only diversions were tapes and videos? And then as they're driving along, Bomber starts eyeing up a beautiful lady waiting across the road. I don't know if you noticed that. And Bomber sees this gorgeous lady, and he turns around and questions Lev, and he says, what about sex? And Wayne says, not a lot. He says, do you know how hard it is to catch a penguin?
A penguin, yeah. I thought they would have stopped for the girl.
Well, I think they were in a rush on their way. I think if they were on their way home from work, they may well have done, but not on the way home. So then we see like a little bit of a montage. Like I say, Den gets pulled over for speeding on the motorway. We then see Ally Fraser waiting outside of Newcastle Airport. We then see Ally Fraser waiting outside of Newcastle Airport. And then we see Barry then pulls up at a hotel. Now, this is the hotel is the Park Inn in Nottingham. So Barry pulls up outside that hotel and enters, and he walks up to the reception, and you know there was the two different areas. The two different receptionists. I think this is what you were talking about earlier, George.
Yeah.
And he says, I wonder if you can help me. I'm looking for Miss Hazel Redfern. And the receptionist, is she staying here? She says, no, she's with a conference. And he says, we have 4 conferences. Which company? And she says, no, she's with a company that organizes conferences, Congress Limited. And she says, yes, I think they're handling Matushi. And that's in the Sycamore Suite on the 3rd floor. And so Barry gets into a lift. And in the lift, there are obviously...
Very crowded lift.
Yeah, it's a very crowded lift. And there's obviously all of these guys who are from out of town, and they're all talking about where they went to eat. And Barry gives them some sage advice. And these guys introduce themselves to Barry and just make the assumption that he is part of their group. And so then Barry enters the conference. There's a woman giving tea and coffee. And Barry goes and asks if she's seen Hazel, and the woman says, Hazel, no, she's around somewhere. And he says, I need to speak to her quite urgently. And then the cheesy American sales manager sort of calls the conference to order. And he says, gentlemen and ladies, can you please take your places? And so the lady who's selling the coffee woman says, if I see her, what name shall I say? And he says, Barry Taylor. And then obviously she's heard all about him because she goes, ooh, no, Barry. Smiles. So obviously young Hazel has been sharing information about their relationship. So then the sales manager just points to a seat and, indicates that he wants Barry to sit down. And then Barry's trying to leave. And then the guy, one of the guys from the lift stands up and sort of kind of ushers Barry into the seat. And he hasn't got the spine, he hasn't got the backbone to just say, no, it's not for me. I'm not supposed to be here. And Barry just sort of sits down. And then the sales manager starts with his patter. cheesy conference salesman patter, and he's talking about how it's an open forum, and Barry tries to, tell him that he's not part of it, but he gets, as open forum as it is, he gets shouted down. And then the sales manager talks about how this is strictly confidential. It's a new product launch, etc. And Barry once again tries to, interrupt, and he again sort of gets shouted down. Plenty of opportunities for question later, and Barry just then sits down. And so Barry is now trapped within the confines of this sales conference about these new crappy computers.
Erasmus Mark II.
That's it, the Erasmus. So
yeah.
So the guys are at the house and they're all working away. And then Wayne says, he's got a bleeding nerve, that Barry, asks us all to help him out, and then he does a runner. And Neville says he went to see Hazel, didn't he? And Wayne's like, against my explicit instructions, yes, all of those hours are wasted in Germany tutoring him in the ways of the opposite sex. Moxie says, I'm not sure that they're your strong suit anymore. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had to pay for those two birds last night. And Wayne tries to give the impression that he shagged both of them women. Says, cheap at half the price, son. And Moxie says, oh, bollocks. And Wayne says, you weren't there, were you, Mox? And Bomber just puts him right in his place. He says, no, but I was. And I heard them turning you away. So they all have a little chuckle at Wayne's expense. And Neville says, I don't know what you were thinking in the first place. I thought you were supposed to be a married man now. And then Wayne, he's like, Krista and I have an understanding, Neville. We've got a modern marriage. And Neville just says, what? You mean it won't last? And Bomber's obviously, Bomber wants a brew. He says, where's that lad? What's his name? And Neville says, Trevor. He says, and Mox says, Trev, he prefers Trev. And he says, oh, does he? And he shouts, Trevor! And Trevor, and he shouts again. And Trevor sticks his head out the window. He goes, the name's Trev. And he says, whatever it is, Sunshine, put the kettle on. He says, I'm not a bloody T-boy, He says, well, what are you? He says, I'm an apprentice. And he says, well, we're skilled craftsmen doing a mate a favour. So put that bloody kettle on. And Trevor slams down the window. And Wayne says, obviously a graduate of the John McEnroe School of Charm and Decorum.
Yeah.
This was the 80s when John McEnroe won a hissy fit on a tennis court. Was it was one of the most well-known things in the world, wasn't it? You can't be serious, man.
There's even a pop song, I think. A pop song.
Oh, was there?
Yeah, at the time, yeah.
So and Bomber says, mind you, some of my skills are a bit rusty. And here we see the first appearance in this episode of young Hazel. So Hazel appears in the alleyway and she sees all the lads working away. And they're obviously having a conversation. Bomber says, some of my skills are a bit rusty. Moxie says, you've not been doing much. And he says, not a lot. He says, it's a treat for me, laying bricks in the fresh air after some of the jobs I've been doing. So Hazel steps up and she coughs and she says, excuse me, do you have any idea where Buddy Taylor is, please? And Wayne says, I wish we did, my dear. And Neville says, we think he's with Hazel. That's his fiancée. And she says, no, he's not. I'm Hazel. So here, let us talk about young Hazel, who again hasn't acknowledged us on Twitter. But young Hazel is played by an actress called Melanie Hill, who has 52 credits on IMDb and is currently on Coronation Street.
Oh, is she? All right. Yeah, well, I stopped watching that years ago, so I didn't.
Well, she has over 432 episodes of Coronation Street.
Oh,
so,
right.
She must have been in it for, 5 years plus.
Yeah. I stopped watching in the 80s, like EastEnders. I stopped.
Yeah. I mean, it's a load of shite in it, but And
she's done a lot. She's done a lot of stuff, though, hasn't she? Yeah.
She did 79 episodes of Waterloo Road, whatever that was.
Yeah.
She was in Heaven. I don't know if you ever watched Heaven. Heaven had Vic Reeves in it. It was like a comedy show about a place called Heaven, which is just in the south side of the River Tyne. It's like Gateshead, South Shields area.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
South Shields. Bit of a comedy there. She was in Holby City, Emmerdale. She was in 24 episodes of The Bill as Marie Carver. So I'm assuming that was Jim Carver's wife or something like that. Again, haven't watched The Bill. Like, well, The Bill's not on. She was in Crocodile Shoes. She was in Spender. She was in Casualty. She was in The Old Faithful, Boone. She was in She was in an episode.
Everyone's been in that.
She was in an episode of Juliet Bravo, but I think one of the things that she was most famous for.
Her husband.
No, she was Aveline in Bread.
Of course, Bread? Yeah.
Aveline. She was Aveline in Bread. But George, you preempted my
your big exclusive.
Well, George, seeing as you've done it, you take it away. Tell us about the husband.
Yeah, she was married to Sean Bean.
Now, this is not casting aspersions on young Melanie Hill, but Sean Bean is kind of regarded as somewhat of a sex symbol. And
yeah.
Sean Bean could essentially probably shag any bird he wanted. So she must be a very, very lovely young lady, because I don't think, she's not exactly the greatest sex symbol walking the planet herself. I think she was punching well above her weight by bagging a bit of Sean Bean. What do you reckon?
I met him in home base one time.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, he was in front of me in the queue, and I thought the girl serving was gonna faint.
Yeah. Well, so Sean Bean, she was married to him in the 90s, and they had 2 children, and obviously those children are now in their 20s. But I was shocked, to say the least, to discover that she'd managed to bag herself a bit of Sean Bean.
Yeah.
But on a tangent, speaking of Sean Bean, there was like these, what was called The Accused. Have you ever seen that? It was a
yes, I watched them. They're very good episodes.
It was like a short series of.
There was only 4 or 5 of them, wasn't there?
And it was short. It was all based around legal stuff and what happened at the beginning of the thing. Somebody was in the dock and they were being accused of committing a crime, and then you found out the background of what was going on.
Yeah.
So, and Sean Bean played a cross-dresser, a transgender,
That's it. Yeah, God.
He wasn't a transgender. I don't think he wanted to be a woman, but he was a transvestite. He used a cross-dresser,
a kind of Eddie Izzard type.
Yeah. And it was also in that episode. It was Stephen Graham, and Stephen Graham played his love interest. So Stephen Graham ended up getting it on with Sean Bean in that episode, and that led to the murder of and then Stephen Graham ended up murdering his wife, and that's why they both got accused. So yes, I mean, Sean Bean's been in. I actually watched something else the other day as well, which was Bravo 20. Haven't watched that for a long time.
Yeah.
And he's been in some fantastic stuff, and he was in the film Ronin. Have you ever seen that? Where he also played a fake SAS guy with Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
And so fantastic actor Sean Bean.
He was in Lady Chatterley, done that as well, didn't he? Lady Chatterley.
That was a bit before my time. I think I wasn't. Probably wasn't allowed to watch that. That was probably one of those things where I was probably sent to bed a little bit early, George. It was probably before my. So. Yes, so Hazel is here, and anyway, so we cut back to Newcastle, and they just before they enter into just before Dennis enters into Scanda Sauna, there's a quick clip, and it's outside, and it's actually a real street in Newcastle. It looks like a bit of stock footage. It doesn't look whatever, but it's in a place called Ouse Street in Newcastle. So that's supposedly outside the Scanda Sauna. And anyway, so the fella in there, he starts questioning. He's like, "Where the hell have you been, Dennis?" And he says, "I had to go away." And he's talking about Ally. He says, "Is he back?" And he says, you've chosen a bad time. He says, is he back? And he says, he's back all right. And he says, hey, what's happened here? Pointing at the dent on the car. And he says, never mind, where is he? He says, he doesn't tell me, does he? He says, I tell you what, I'd give him a wide berth if I was you, lad. He was in a filthy mood when he spoke to me. He says, well, if you see him, tell him I'll be at home. And Ally is at his lawyer's. And they are looking at the pictures of Thornley Manor. And his lawyer is Malcolm Hallwood. So they're talking about the Thornley Manor, and Malcolm says it's enormous. And Ally says it's 32 acres. It was a school when Kenny bought it, before he had that little spat of bother with that forced him into premature exile in sunny Spain. And obviously this was still back in the 80s when the extradition treaty between Spain and England had expired, and the entire criminal fraternity of the UK decamped down to the Costa del Sol.
As we find out in later episodes.
Absolutely. And so the solicitor says, where do I come? And he says, well, Kenny can do sod all with it while he's stuck in the Costa del Crime. And if he sets foot back here, they'll collar him. He says, so I bumped into him on the golf course on Friday. And let me tell you, Spain has not improved his game. And he told me all about it. He said, so I said, leave it with me and I'll take it off your hands. We'll tart it up, do a conversion and job, and sell it off as time-sharing units. And I'm like, why would anyone buy a timeshare in Nottingham, Nottinghamshire? And Malcolm says, what's the panic? He says, well, to be frank, he had virtually closed the deal with the coal board, but if we move fast, we can get out of that. Now I've got the phone number of his solicitor here, so you can get onto that straight away. And he says, right, and he says, and the attraction for Kenny is that I will take the proceeds down to him in a plastic bag in cash. And the solicitor says, I didn't hear that, of course. And he says, that's what I pay you for, not hearing everything I say. And he says, what? So they cut back and you see the outside of Norma's house. So this is in Wallsend. Those cranes that you see in the background are from the Swan Hunters shipyard, which was a massive industry on the river in Newcastle when I was a kid.
Oh, of course,
And when the shipyards closed and there was a lot of people got made redundant, it was a big, there was a big thing in Newcastle. I remember, I was only a kid when it happened. But it was, I remember it being on the news, and it led to obviously a very high rate of unemployment in the area, quite a lot of desperation, and it wasn't a good thing. But this is obviously, when the shipyards were still operational. So that's in, he's pulling up in, and that is in Wallsend. And he enters the house, and he's his sister Norma. Have you seen him? And he says, no, not yet, no. And he says, he's out. And she says, and she's like giving him the advice, Dennis, you should never have taken his car. And like, oh, wait a minute, he's supposed to, he's like, hindsight's a wonderful thing. He says, wait a minute, he's supposed to be in Spain for 3 weeks in case you forgot. And then she says, there was this fella around here looking for you. And he says, who? One of Ally's lads? She says, well, I don't know. He might have been. He looked like a right bruiser. And she says, I told you before, if you're going to work for Ally Fraser, you're not going to be in good company. And he says, all right, I'll handle it. If you notice, like when he walked in, the first thing he did was pick up the bottle of scotch off the side.
Yeah.
And he's got a bottle of scotch in his hand, and then he says, I'm going down the wheat sheaf for a jar. It's like, make your mind up. He says, if he phones, take a message or come and get us. He says, Dennis, man, I've got to go to work in half an hour. And he says, I'll be back by then. So he goes to the pub, and the barmaid he's drinking a pint, and the barmaid's in the middle of serving him a large scotch. And she says, "Ooh, Dennis, did that bloke catch you?" Oh, by the way, this pub is also in Nottingham somewhere. It's not in Newcastle. And she says, "Did that bloke catch you?" He says, "What bloke?" He says, "He was in here half an hour ago asking for you." He says, "Did he leave a name?" He says, "No, he just asked if we'd seen you." "What's the matter, Dennis?" "Not paid the bookie." So Hazel turns back up. Obviously, so Hazel's turned up at the house, They cut back to Barry's house, and Hazel is inspecting the work that's gone on. And obviously they've knocked the wall down, and she's like, why did you knock it down? And Wayne said, I thought it was the general idea. And, you know, Neville said open plan. He said it was supposed to be a connecting hatch. Now, have you ever lived in a house with a connecting hatch, George, between the kitchen and the
No.
I did. When I remember the house that we lived in from the age of 7 till about 17 in Newcastle had a hatch between one of them hatches in the kitchen. And well, the thing was, is we ended up well, you know, it was the living room or whatever. Anyway,
I've been in plenty that have had it. I've been in plenty that have had it.
It was a proper 80s thing, wasn't it? And and I don't think anybody has ever used the hatch. You know what I mean? Trying to put stuff through a hatch is so awkward. And anyway, and so Neville apologises, sorry, and Bomber says we can soon put it back. And Neville says we just wanted to make a start, seeing as there's that much to do before you and Barry can get married. And so Bomber says to Trevor, he says, yeah, you. And Trevor says, what? And he says, why didn't you tell us that she didn't want the wall down? And Trevor rebuttals, and he says, because the skilled craftsman never asked me, which is fair enough. And he's been a bit of a prick. And Hazel says, oh, it's not your fault, Barry should have been here. And Wayne says, well, he's not here because he's gone looking for you after what happened last night. And the reason for that, Hazel, is entirely down to me. See, I took him down the pub. Well, we hadn't seen each other for yonks, and we sort of got involved with nostalgic reminiscences. And Neville said he was ever so upset when he realised how late he was. Didn't sleep a wink at all last night, Moxie says. And Hazel says, he slept here. And he says, yeah, with me and Nev. He left the pub to go and see you, and apparently you wouldn't let him in. And she says, that was childish of me. I was just so furious with him. I should have had him out with him there and then. And Moxie says, yeah, you should have done. Then he wouldn't have got breathalyzed. Like Moxie just grassed his mate right up for that. And so Dennis is, obviously worrying and trying to make contact with Ally Fraser, and he is on the phone in the pub, the old style phone box in the pub. Oh, yeah.
Remember them well.
Yeah, I remember. They used to have one in the rugby club. And when I finished playing rugby, and I'd finished playing rugby, get ready, and I'd go into the bar, and it was like you could ring without putting your money in, couldn't you?
Yeah.
So you'd ring and they'd answer, and then when they answered, then you had to put your money in and you could sleep.
Yeah.
So I could ring me mother, and she would answer the phone, and obviously she would hear it going beep, beep, beep. And then she that I'd finished rugby, and that she had to fucking come down the rugby club to pick me up. So it was so Dennis is on the phone. He says, hello, it's me, Dennis. Has Ali been in yet? He says, look, and obviously the bloke on the phone's like, you're in the shit. He says, yeah, look, he says, I know I'm not very popular. That's why I want to see him as soon as possible. And he says, I'll be at home all right. And then they cut to Barry back in the conference. And Barry's still there. So how long do you reckon Barry's been sat there? Half an hour, 2 hours? I mean, he's been
quite a while, yeah.
And I mean, bearing in mind, still in the suit from yesterday, not had a shower, it's absolutely stinking the place up. And the sales manager in his cheesy American accent, I believe he's actually Canadian, the actor, but he's got the cheesiest of cheese going on. And he's actually, I looked on his IMDb, and he's been in quite a few things, that guy. He's I'm not going to say he's a mega famous actor, but he was, he did a reasonable amount of work.
Yeah, he had a sort of familiar face. I've sort of seen him before, yeah.
He's been in movies and stuff like that. And so anyway, the sales manager's harping on with his cheesy Yank accent, and then he asks for any questions, and then he picks on Barry. And Barry says, me. And the bloke next to him says, go on, son, give him the right answer. He'll have his job by Christmas. And Barry stands up and he says, I think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. And the guy says, speak up, name and branch. He says, Barry Taylor. He says, by rights, I shouldn't be here. And he says, oh, why do you feel like that? And he says, because I don't work for you lot. And the guy loses his shit. He said, what the hell are you doing here? He says, I'm looking for Miss Hazel Redfern. And as he's backing out, he goes, she's my fiancée. Obviously, they were talking about how confidentiality is key. And then Barry's there, Barry's been in there learning all the secrets of this new new top quality computer. But they say, he goes, we can't offer a better system and we can't offer a better price. Like that. You're not offering a lot, are you, mate? So anyway, they cut back to Norma's. And Dennis gets back and he says, has he rang? And she says, no. And he says, you better get off to work. And she goes, I'm not going. If someone's coming around here to belt you, I'm staying in. It's my house. No blood or anybody else's on me carpet. And he says, come on, Norma, I'm not in short pants anymore. And there's a knock at the door. Anyway, so Norma looks out the window and she sees who it is. And she says, oh, God, it's him. He's back. And Dennis just stop right there. And Dennis opens the door. And who is there but none other than
Oz.
The bruiser himself is Oz. And he says, oh, it's you. And he says, oh, Dennis. And Norma says, who is it? And he says, it's Oz. It's me mate, Oz. And he says, this is me sister, Norma. And she says, and Oz says, well, we met, but I didn't like, because, and Dennis says, it's all right. You don't have to worry about anything being spilt on the carpet. And she says, right, I'll get off to work now. And he says, do you want a beer? And he says, ooh, lovely. So Dennis goes to the fridge. And so Oz
cans of Nuki Brown, is it?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Well, this is, so do you remember in the last episode when I was talking about it, when they pulled up the lights and Neville saw Dennis in the Jag for the first time?
Yeah.
The advert in the background was a can of Newcastle brown ale.
Oh, yeah.
And it was sitting, when they opened the can, it said wolf coming out of it. Because like I said, Newcastle brown ale's nickname is dog in Newcastle.
Yeah.
And so they were obviously, this was obviously maybe a bit of early product placement for Auf Wiedersehen.
Yeah.
So they had the billboard of Newcastle brown ale, and now they have the actual cans themselves. But anyway, so Dennis goes to the fridge and Oz speaks to Norma and he says, is he not living with Vera anymore? And she says, no, not for over a year. He says, oh, that explains it. I went down to the old house. And she says, well, she moved to the coast with the bands. But then she says to him, she goes, I'm sure you've got other things to talk about. Basically saying, don't fucking bring that subject up. And Oz said, what, touchy subject? Like he says, right, got you.
Of course he does. He does exactly the opposite.
I mean, like, he put his big foot, his even bigger mouth. So Norma says, right, I'm off. And he says, right, ta-ra. And, goodbye. And he says, right, ta-ra, meeting you. And Dennis gives him the beer, the can of brown ale. They open it up and they drink. He says, there you go, mate. And Oz says, cheers, been a long time. He says, cheers. And then Oz straight away, like the second ago was saying touchy subject. He says, must be kicking yourself about this. And he says, And he says, well, coming back and ditching that tart in Germany, coming back who shoots off and leaves you and drags the kids away, and you end up living with your sister. And he's like, thanks very much. He's like, I just needed that. Someone like you coming back here and telling us all that. I mean, like, he just fucking, like you say, does exactly the opposite of what he was told to do. And then he realizes that he's laying that Oz fucking realizes he's put his foot. He says, well, these things happen, don't you? I mean, nobody knows that better than me, Dan. And he says, hey, I heard you got hired out the Falklands, like. And he says, oh, did you hear? He says, aye. He says, what did it say on the charge sheet? First person to be forcibly ejected since the Indians. And Dennis says, quite none of that. Congratulations. Says, thank you. He says, well, actually, it wasn't all due to me. He says, what happened was I was standing in this bar on my own, minding my own business. Sounds very like McGowan.
Sounds McGowan, yeah.
And he says, ye know me. And he says, then next thing, in walks in these bloody paratroopers. He says, you ever come across them? He says, what a bunch of heed the balls. Like, for Oz to say someone's fucking mental is, He says, anyways, next thing, crash, bang, wallop, and I'm being marched up the gangplank of a bloody Hercules between two geek gnarly MPs. Whoa, what a journey that was. Halfway around the world, and all you got to see was a bog on Ascension Island. And he says, rough, was it? So it was no picnic. He says, so what did you do then? He says, when I got back, I had myself a couple of nights in London, which I thought I deserved. Like after 6 months in the Falklands, when, men are men and sheep get nervous. So you spent all your readies there? And he says, he says, no, what happened was, I got back and I was going to come up yen, but, he says, with what things have been like between me and Marjorie over the last few years, haven't exactly been, you know, what you could call idyllic as we were staying. He says, I rings her up from Breeze Norton and some strange gadgy answers.
Gadgy, I love that.
Gadgy, that's a proper Geordie word, that he goes. Some strange gadgy answers. The phone, he says, so I simply put 2 and 2 together and realised that things had deteriorated even further.
As if they could.
He'd been in the he'd been away to the Falklands for 6 months and come back and just rang his, like, after being in Germany for 6 months, you know, after that, and so he's fucking, and he just, you know, the fact that he was, what was he doing, expecting Marjorie just to be sat there waiting for fucking anyway, and he says, but you know me, Dennis, he says, I've never been one to shirk family responsibilities. Really odds. And he says, so I went down and bought the bear a train set from Havleys, and then I went down to and I got on a flight to Florida.
He doesn't even say he gave him that. I mean, what's he doing with the train set?
I imagine him getting on the plane with a train set under his arm.
Yeah.
So, and Dennis says, Florida? He says, aye, Florida, you know, America, man. He says, was no, man. It was door cheap. He says, £299 for 14 weeks. With your board, and like he's like the way he does it, guys, you know, with your board and your grub, and he says, and Dennis says, that's a fortnight. He says, you've been away nearly a year. And he says, all right, well, what happened is I missed the plane on the way back. And so he starts to tell his story, but the phone rings, and fucking, you know, Oz just in somebody's house, like Norma's house, never been there before, just fucking picks up the phone. Hello, Patterson's. And he goes, who? Ally Fraser. And Dennis grabs the phone. He goes, hello, Ally. He goes, hi, it's Dennis here. He says, look, I'll explain when I get there, right? I'm coming straight over. He says, right. And then he says to Oz, and he puts the phone, he says, I've got to get going, Oz. And I was like, yeah. And he says, how are you? I've got to get going, man. He says, all right. He says, what's he doing ringing you up, Fraser? And he says, I'll work for him. So they're in the car and they're on the way to see Ally. And obviously Dennis has now enlightened Oz to the story, and Oz says, I mean, ye of all people working for a scumbag like Fraser. He says, aye, well, times change, Oz. He says, where will I drop you off? And he says, oh, you're all right, I'll just come along with you. And he's like, look, this could be really tricky, man, this. And he says, I'm in for a right bollocking here. He says, well, all the more reason I should be along. He says, he doesn't know about the shunt in the arse end of the car yet, does he? And he says, well, he says to take the heat off you. He says, if you tell him that you've got the job in hand, he says, what are you talking about, man, job in hand? He says, well, tell him I'm your mechanic. And he says, I'm along to give you an estimate, you know. And he says, how's that gonna help? He says, well, you know, War Norman's got the spray shop on the Westgate Road. He says, well, we'll dodge up there, we'll have it knocked up and sprayed by midnight. No more than £50, I guarantee it. And so the Westgate Road in Newcastle there used to be a lot of motorbike shops and garages.
Yeah.
And so they pull up at the Scanda sauna back at Ally's, and the first time we see Big Baz. So again, sent Big Baz a message on Facebook, didn't get a reply.
Yeah.
So
but I know he's quite open to. He meets a lot of the guys, doesn't he?
So one of the guys, so it was Daniel Lancaster, who is the guy that does all the location videos. Invested it. He said, "Look, just send him a message on Facebook." But I looked at his Facebook. I just think he's not one of them people that fucking looks at it all the time. So it's not like he's posting up stuff every day. I think the last time he posted something up was Christmas. So, you know, we'll forgive him. But yeah, Ying Tong John is what he's known as.
That's it. I thought that was a bit strange. Ying Tong. That must be. Yeah, he's a folk singer, isn't he? He's a folk singer.
Oh, I don't know about that. But
yeah. He was known all round up Newcastle, playing the clubs. He was a folk singer. Yeah.
Oh, right. Well, his name's like, I don't know, it was John whatever. You know, he's
John Strachan.
That's it, John Strachan. Yeah. So his name's normal on Facebook. So anyway, so Den gets out and he says, "All right, Baz," and Oz says, "All right," like looking at Baz, and Big Baz is pretty stone-faced. So, the they cut to Ally's office, and Ally is speaking to his secretary, and he says, now I want to get out the day after tomorrow, Pamela. So can you ring up Heathrow, check the flights to Malaga, and ring up Vicky and tell her what you booked me on and when I'm expected, okay? And she says, all right, Mr. Fraser, are you going to be stopping at the villa? And he says, you bet your sweet buddy I will. And Dennis walks in, and Dennis says, oh, if you're busy, Ally, I'll come back later, all right?
Yeah.
Trying to avoid it. And Ally's like, no, you get yourself in here right now. And obviously outside you see Oz is like, pretending to, to assess the damage done. And Big Baz looks.
Yeah.
And he says, Pamela, book me a table at La Trattoria for 3 at 8 o'clock. And she says, okay. And he says, and close the door, Pamela. I'm not taking any calls. And the way that he says it is like, it's quite a menacing way that he says it. He's like, I need to be left alone with Dennis. And obviously Dennis looks fairly worried, and he says, so where did you bugger off to? And Dennis says, look, Ally, what happened? He says, and he just gets interrupted straight. He says, when I go for a well-deserved vacation, I do not expect my staff to do the same. And he says, it wasn't like that. He says, no, do I expect them to have the audacity to take my Jag, which Billy now informs me has a crumpled left wing. And he says, look, I've already obtained an estimate. He says, I expected to be away for about 3 weeks, but I felt comfortable in the knowledge that I had people here I could rely on. Someone to hold the fort, Dennis. And he says, someone to make my presence felt even though I was in absentia. And Dennis says, it won't happen again, Ally, in a minute. And he says, well, that might be the truest thing you've ever said, my friend. And he says, look, if I'm in for a caning here, fine, but don't milk it. He says, I've been to Wolverhampton, and I'll tell you why. One of my mates I worked with in Germany called us up because he's getting married and he wants his house fixing up. He called everybody up. So A, I wanted to see me mates again, and B, I thought it would do me soul some good to do 2 weeks honest graft instead of brown nosing for you because I owe you $6,000. And he, fair play to Dennis. Ally Fraser is, supposedly the big gangster, and Dennis is not afraid to, to stand up for himself.
Yeah.
And Ally Fraser's a little bit taken aback by this, but you can see, his little naughty brain starts working straight away, and he's like, did they all show up? And he goes, what? He says, these pals you were with in Germany. And he says, most of them, yeah. Why? And he says, are they reliable workers, are they, Dennis? And he says, for what they do, top rank, why? And he says, have you eaten today? And he's like, changes tack. He starts being nicey. Not really nice. He says, no, me. He says, I've been chasing around like a fart in a colander. Never heard of that before. And so he shouts, Baz, get yourself up here. And obviously, Oz sees this, and Oz thinks that Big Baz is going to chin Dennis. And so Oz follows him up. And he starts showing him the pictures of Thornley Manor. And he says, you see this house? He says, yeah. He says, it needs a conversion. I need a bunch of reliable cowboys in there. And
reliable cowboys.
He says, your lads could fit the bill, right? He says, well, I don't know. They've got their own lives until he'd, haven't they? And he says, oh, Dennis. He goes, people don't do people favours. If they can afford 2 weeks out of their lives to go to Wolverhampton, it proves they've got sod all else better to do. I mean, it sounds like the sort of blokes who would do a lot of work for a bit of money without too much form filling in or that. Are you hearing what I'm saying? And Dennis says, oh, I know exactly what you're saying. He says, well, I can ask them. He says, they might be interested. He says, do it, Dennis. I need this. And the way that he stressed, he goes, I need this. And so Big Baz enters, and he says, you wanted me, Mr. Fraser? He says, aye, Baz. He says, we're famished. He said, would Indian suit you, Dennis? I mean, who has a curry for the lunch? I mean, curry's a dinner. I love a curry, but I couldn't eat curry for lunch.
Oh, I've had it for breakfast.
Yeah.
But I still drink.
Disgusting. But yes, definitely not curry for lunch for me, mate. And he says, aye, Baz. He says, we're famished. Would Indian suit you, Dennis? He says, fine. He says, right. He says, we'll have the lamb tikka, 1 chicken tandoori, a couple of onion bhajis, and a special rice for 2. And then we see Oz enters the office, and the receptionist is like, you can't go in there, you can't go in. And he bursts in, and Dennis is like, Oz, And Ally Fraser's like, who the hell are you? And he says, never mind who I am, I know who you are. And Dennis is like, Osman. And he says, it's all right, I'll handle this, like in his usual fashion, bull in a china shop. And he says, listen, and I'll about your reputation right now. Couldn't give a monkey's chuff about it. He goes, but I'll tell you this, one finger on him and you'll get that.
You get this.
And he says, all right. Anyway, Ally Fraser gives Big Baz the nod. And Big Baz steps forward and he just, without, doesn't break a stride. He goes, all right, Gerdouche, and sticks the nut clean on Big Baz and starts giving him a foot. And Big Baz hits the deck and he starts towing into him when he's on the floor. And I mean, it's the actions, the actions of a man seasoned to violence. And Dennis screams, Osman, for Christ's sake, man. He says, it's all right. He'll do you no more trouble. He says he wasn't going to only gone for a tandoori chicken. And what? And Ally Fraser says, who is this lunatic? And he says, look, it's all been a big mistake. He says, this is Osman. He's one of the lads I was working with in Germany I was telling you about. And he goes, was he now? And Oz realizes that he's put his foot in it or his forehead in it, as in this case. He says, I'll meet you outside. I'll wait by the car, shall I? And as he leaves, Big Baz is groaning on the floor. And Fraser, Ally Fraser, says not too many people chin Big Baz.
Big Baz.
And then he looks and he thinks and he goes, make him the charge hand. So they cut back to Barry's. And so the lads are all sitting
playing cards.
And they're playing cards. And they recycle a joke here. So Neville says, they're playing pontoon and Neville says, twist again. And Bomber says, I did last summer, which is the same joke that Oz used in Germany. And Neville says, bust again. And he says, what about you? And he says, and Trevor says, I'm playing these. And Moxie says, they pay 18s. And obviously Moxie wins and he says, sorry lads, but that's the way it goes sometimes. And Barry comes in, he says, what's this? And he goes, oh, hello Barry, where have you been? He says, never mind where I've been, Neville. He says, look, I'm not paying you good money to play pontoon. He says, yeah, well, if you had showed up, we would have known what we were supposed to do, Moxie said. And Barry says, well, you're not supposed to be knocking that bloody wall down. And he says, that's what you're not supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be a hatch, that is. And Neville says, aye, Hazel told us that. And then Barry panics, says, Hazel's been here. He says, aye, we've all met her. She seems a charming girl. Bomber says, very nice indeed. She was a bit upset about that wall. That's why we've down tools till you were here, till you got here. And Trevor says, where have you been? And he says, pointless to explain, Trevor. Like, where have you been? He's been sat for 2 hours in some pony fucking computer conference. And he says, where's Hazel now? And Neville says, Wayne took her home. And Barry starts to panic. And he's obviously thinking that Wayne's trying to shag fucking Hazel. And he says, Wayne took her home. He says, yeah. He goes, why? He says, and Neville says, because he's got a car. And then Barry obviously whispers into Trevor's ear, why didn't you take her? And he says, because she preferred a BMW to the back of my bike. That's why. And Barry says, I shall deal with you. Bomber said, Moxie says, shall I deal you in, Barry, or what? And Barry mumbles, Hazel, no, very much, I've got to get round there. And Bomber says, you want to tell us where to make a start? And he says, I can't think, and he runs out. And Bomber just says, oh, go on then, deal the cards. So we cut to Hazel's flat. And Hazel has invited Wayne inside for a cup of tea. And she says, milk or sugar? And he says, yes, both, please. And she says, have some cake, it's fresh. And he said, I wouldn't say no. And Hazel says, I find this rather difficult, Wayne, because I don't know you. But do you know, I feel as though I do through Barry, because you were his closest friend in Germany, weren't you? He said, and Wayne's like, huh? And he said you used to do things together, visit museums on his motorbike. And Wayne's like, yeah, I missed that. And she says, well, that's why I wanted to talk to you about Barry. And Wayne says, oh, look now, Hazel, if it's about last night, I've told you, it weren't the lad's fault. She says, I'm not talking about the Chinese restaurant, Wayne. I'm talking about the entire last 2 years, our engagement, in fact. And Wayne says, oh, he says, been going out on the piss a lot, has he? Excuse me. He says, I mean, sort of going out with the lads, having a couple. And she says, no, when he has had a chance, the poor lad went out, when's he had a chance? So poor lad went off to the Falklands and he did that for us, for our house, for our future. When he says, well, I didn't quite see what you were driving at. He said, well, sometimes I have to ask myself if he's ever had a chance to, slow down, take stock and ask himself if this marriage is what he really wants. And Wayne realizes he says, I see, and he puts down his stuff and he says, and he leans back and he's like, or is it that you have had a chance? And she says, maybe with all the sacrifices he's made, my emotions are a mixture of guilt and gratitude. And Wayne says, it's a bit late in the day for that, ain't it, love? And she says, well, with all of you lot arriving and finishing the house, suddenly everything seems a bit more, well, imminent. And Wayne says, well, how can I help? And he reaches over and he touches her on the leg. And she sort of recoils a little bit. And she said, I thought, well, while you were up here, you might have a word, just the two of you and try and discover his real feelings. Would you do that for me? And he says, yeah, that's all right. That's no bother. She says, thank you. Wayne says, see, all these premarital jitters are par for the course, And she says, all that's behind you now, isn't it? Barry showed me a picture of your wife. She's very pretty, isn't she? Where did Barry get a picture of fucking...
Yeah.
And Wayne says, yeah, very. And she goes, why don't you ask her to come up at the weekend? And he says, she's in Germany. And Hazel says, visiting family? He says, well, sort of. Yeah, she goes, she's there indefinitely. Now, look, don't tell Barry or the lads about this. And she says, of course not. And Wayne finally admits. She says, well, look, he goes, I probably shouldn't be telling you this under the circs, but should I? He goes, but you mustn't worry about your Barry. Sound as a bell, Barry, not like me. He says, I'm a bit of a flake, Jack the lad, always have been. Suppose that's why she left me. She said, I'll come back when you grow up. She says, and Wayne admits that it could take a little bit of a while, that. So then the buzzer rings, and obviously it's Barry. So Hazel says, excuse me, and looks out the window and says, it's Barry. And Wayne says, I'd best be off then. She says, look, I'll tell you what later. She says, I'll have a word with him later on. And Hazel says, you're the one person I feel I can confide in. And he says, good luck. And then Hazel says, nice to meet you, Wayne. Goodbye. And then Barry's at the door with a bunch of flowers. And he tries to straighten his tie on the still dirty suit that he's
stinking suit, yeah.
And Wayne says, good thinking, son. He says, now, if I were you, and Barry just cuts him off and he says, but you're not me, are you? He says, you are the last person whose advice I'd ask. Thank you very much, Mr. Wayne Norris. And he goes in and slams the door. And then we cut, and Dennis and Oz are in the camper van, and they're obviously
LVW.
Well, again, so that in the background there is in Walker, so which is in the east end of the city. It's a pretty rough area of Newcastle, but those block of flats, Walker Dean House, and Eastfield House. I mean, it's in Walker, right? And one of them is called Walker Dean House, and one of them is called Dean House. So you've got Dean House in Walker and Walker Dean House in Walker. Imagine pissed people going in the wrong block of flats. Yeah. But I mean, I've never been there, but I can just imagine they're pretty rammed full of heroin. But it's basically they're just off. There's a famous, quite a famous road called the Foss Way, which was an old road. And so they're driving down. They're driving away from. And the thing is that apparently there is a bit of a gaff there for the locals to notice, because they are actually driving in the wrong direction. So if you were to go drive from Newcastle to Wolverhampton, you'd be going the other way down that road. But that is in Newcastle. So they cut back to Barry's house. Now, so Bomber is, he says, look, before we put that wall back, are you quite sure it's what your intended really wants? And Barry says, yes. we resolved everything last night, and Barry's actually had a change of clothes. And he says, Moxie says, including the hatch, and he says, yes. And he says, and Neville pipes up and he says, well, I think a breakfast bar is nice myself. He says, that's what we've got at home. And he says, I don't want any more debate about it now. Please just put the bricks up and Wayne can stick the hatch in. And Wayne says, you're still set on that hatch, are you, Barry? He says, I'll tell you what, why don't you have he says, why don't you have one of them nice archways? He says, because otherwise, every time you want another bowl of Brussels, you're going to have to walk all the way around, ain't you? And Barry says, Wayne, will you shut up, please? Who's going to have to live here? Hazel and I agreed, so please, just everyone stick to it. Stick to it. And Neville says, I still advise against them dimmer switches. He says, I put them in for Brenda. I've had nothing but trouble with them. And Barry says, Hazel set her heart on dimmers. He says, it's just that they're unreliable and dangerous. And Barry's like got a screwdriver and he's fiddling with a switch, and then a big spark and plumes of smoke and that out the thing. And anyway, so again, we cut, and Dennis and Oz are on the road, and Dennis pulls over and he tells Oz it is his time to drive. And he says, Oz, how are you? It's your turn to drive. And like Oz wakes up and he says, oh, we're here. He says, no, man, it's your turn to drive. He says, I'm knackered, man. And he says, how are you? So Oz gets in the front and he goes, which way? And he says, straight ahead all the way. He says, it's a bit of it. And Oz says, it's a bit of a heat, this, isn't it? He says, what are you talking about, man? It's all right. Gans champion. And then Oz puts his boot on the dashboard and he says, what do you think of them? He says, me boots, man. He says, oh, and Dennis is obviously not bothered at all.
He puts a can of beer on the dashboard as well, doesn't he? Puts
you know, another bit of drink driving. And Oz says, he goes, Amarillo, Texas. Them's from, you know, and he says, that's how come I missed the plane, actually. So, and he picks up his story from where he left up before. He says, well, I thought while I was there, I had to go and do to Texas and get myself properly threaded out, you know, whole 9 yards, boots, jacket, them shorts with the pointy metal collars on. And Dennis says, you didn't have to go all the way to Texas to get them, did you? And he says, well, I didn't realise how far it was, bloody massive, you know, America. And he says, then the bloody trip from Texas to Memphis on one of them Greyhounds. He says, great, you've no idea how long that can take. And he says, you went to Memphis and all, like, he says, aye, well, he says, I had to go and, he says, I had to, didn't I, while I was there, you know, Graceland's, pay me respects to the king. Hey, it was a very emotional experience, you know, Den. And Dennis is like, aye. He says, just me and Elvis Presley's corpse. So is that what they've got? Is they've got Elvis Presley's corpse in Graceland? Is he embalmed?
Must do, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. So, and Dennis says, you've certainly lived, Oz. He says, here's me being stuck in the Northeast for the last 3 years, you know, grafting me bollocks off fun out. And he says, well, that wasn't the high point. He says, I went to Nashville after that. And he gets, yeah, look at this. And he pulls a Polaroid picture out. He says, yeah, what about this? And he says, I'm standing there in this bar, just me, you know, having a live now. And he says, and he walked in with his entourage, like, you know. And he goes, whoever it is, he goes, he's out of focus. And he says, no, that was the picture. Look, the picture. Yeah, he goes, there's me hand run. No, he goes, that there, with me hand run, with his hand run me, is only the great Merle Haggard. And he says, aye, he says, it could be Merle Oberon, for all I can tell. Do you know who Merle Oberon is, George? I don't.
No.
Didn't even bother looking it up. And Oz says, no. And he says, it could be Merle. And he goes, Oz and Merle live in Nashville. Yeah. And then he makes and he's like, no. And then they cut back to Barry's. So, Dennis and Oz, Dennis walks into Barry's. And he says, hello, lads. And they're all like, hey, hello, Den. And Barry's like, hello, Dennis, I didn't expect you back so soon, mate. He goes, well, I didn't. And Neville says, I didn't expect you back at all. And Dennis says, I had a bit of business to take care of, but I came back because I've had this proposition. Might interest some of you lads now. He says, there's good news and there's bad news attached to this. Which one do you want first? And negative Neville says, let's have the bad news. And he says, here. And he whistles and Oz enters and they all go, Oz! And Moxie's like, bloody hell. And he goes away, aye. And so obviously then Dennis shows, Dennis has shown them the picture of a phone manner. And he says, right, lads, He wants a quick conversion so we can sell it over the odds and make a tasty profit. Moxie says, the unacceptable face of capitalism. And he says, aye, that's right. He says, but we're getting paid top whack. So Dennis says, well, I've already seen the drawings. I reckon there's at least 2 months' work. Barry says, 2 months. And Barry's like, oh, 2 months, 10 weeks. And Dennis just goes, listen, he goes, I'm in charge, Barry. So there's no gaffers, eh? And he goes, as you were, Dennis. And Neville says, this bloke wouldn't happen to be Ally Fraser, would it? He says, yes, Neville, yes. He says, when he says, who's Ally Fraser? And he says, Neville says, local villain. And Neville says, look, man, his money's just as good as anybody else's, Neville, isn't it? Or he is snowed under with work offers at the moment, like. Bomber says, well, I'm game. Lifesavers for Bomber. Bloody sight better bounce round the ring and have an old lady stubbing fag ends out on your ass. And Dennis says, Moxie, and he says, and Moxie says, I fancy it. He goes, I'm fairly free. I'm fairly free. There you go. That's a little bit of it. He goes, I'm fairly free. Because he's not free, is he? He's on the run. And Dennis says, what about you, Wayne? He says, I can't. And Bomber says, I can't see it appealing to him, not with a BMW and a scrumptious little wife at home. And Wayne's still trying to style it out. He says, yeah, he says, I know about all that. He says, but I mean, if it's only for a couple of months, it could be a giggle, couldn't it? And he throws a can of lager at us. And Nev, and he says, well, if it's only for a couple of months, I suppose. So he says, right, so you're all in. And Barry says, well, he says, I'd be with you straight away, you know, for old time's sake. But he says, you know, and he says, you know, he's obviously, he says, I'll be with you. He goes, but with me in pending nuptials. And also said, we'll miss your sparkling repartee, Barry Taylor, Prince of Trivia. And they all laugh. And
Bob sits on the toilet.
Pulls it, sits down, and he says, and Bomber says, when do we start? He says, Monday. And Barry screams, Monday? She says, that only gives you 4 days to finish me house. And he says, we better get cracking. And so they kick off into a montage of the lads working away. And so the song, the Seven Again.
Seven Again, yeah.
Yeah, and so the song plays in the background. And so obviously, you know, they're laying bricks, they're putting up wallpaper, they're painting, you know, and there's the montage of the work. And so after the work has finished, the montage is finished, and what we see is Hazel arriving at the newly renovated property, and all of the work is essentially done. And she rings the bell. And Barry opens the door, he says, come in. He says, don't touch the paintwork because it's not yet quite dry. And Hazel, you know, is looking around the gaff, and, you know, Barry's talking about the lads, and he says, it's all done, rewiring, dimmers, paintwork, built-in bookshelf.
The pictures on the wall.
Yeah, music centre will go up here. He says, wallpaper and everything except for the carpet, but that's coming in on Tuesday. He says, I never thought we'd do it. And I'll tell you something, Hayes, only these fellas could have done it. You know, you've laughed at me in the past, and when I've gone on about the special bonds forged with comrades in adversity, he said, but the proof of the pudding, he says, the proof's in the pudding, isn't it? They have each left their homes and their families to do this for me, for us, kid. We won't be asking any wedding presents from these boys. No need for any sets of fish knives and forks for any of them. Oh, no. They have already given us more than we could ever possibly have asked. And Hazel basically breaks down into tears.
Crying.
And Barry thinks they're tears of joy, whereas in fact they are tears of the fact that she's been hiding this secret, that she is having second thoughts. And Barry says, I know, kid, I feel a bit emotional myself. So they cut to the motel, the car park, and this is the outside of the Holiday Inn in San Diego, which is junction 25 of the M1. And so, you know, Dennis is, you know, they're loading up into the car, into Wayne's car and Dennis's camper van. And Dennis is, you know, trying to encourage them to shake a leg. And he says, all right, lads, move yourselves. And Moxie says, don't say that, not after the bloody curry we had last night. Again, do you remember when they had the curry in Germany and Moxie was in there
on the toilet? Yeah.
So Dennis says, he says, listen, Wayne, we're about to lose each other. There's a big motorway calf just before we come off the motorway, right? He says, be there for a brekkie. And Wayne says, right. And Oz says, hold on, I've not had a cup of tea yet. And he says, we've already had tea. We're supposed to be on the road an hour ago. He says, look, Dennis, if you're going to be the gaffer on this new job, you better get something straight away. He says, what? He says, we're entitled to proper meal breaks, right? He says, I'm travelling time to the job and back. And another thing, don't be using Barry's gaff as a yardstick for our work rate either, right? And Moxie says,
I think this is the first episode they actually refer to him as the gaffer, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. So this is, Dennis is now, I mean, by default, I mean, he's always been, the
leader, yeah. Now he's the gaffer.
He's the actual official gaffer. And so he said, Moxie says, we'll spin this one out a little bit longer. And then Barry's van enters and Bill says, and he says, oh, here comes Barry to see us off. And Wayne says, what's wrong with you, mate? You look worse than Moxie feels. That's quite a good. You look worse than Moxie feels. And Bomber says, I hope you haven't come to tell us your checks are going to bounce. And he says, no. He says, I've just come to get the address of the place that you're going to, like. And Dennis says, it's no bother, I'll write it down for you. And Neville says, oh, isn't that nice? He's going to write us a postcard from his honeymoon. And then Barry drops the bomb and he says, there won't be a honeymoon. There won't be a wedding. He says, Hazel needs to think things through, like. He says, so, I'll be with you in a couple of days. And thus is the end of the episode. So, as we saw, for the first time, I think, the first time in this series. So in the last series, the only other person that got a solo credit was McGowan, was Michael Elford.
Yeah.
And in this, so now Ally Fraser, Bill Patterson gets himself a solo credit. And then Norma and Hazel, Malcolm Hallwood and Trevor. And then for the conference staff, so the sales manager, the stewardess and the receptionist all get a credit. So that's the receptionist in the hotel for the thingy. And they call her a stewardess. I'm assuming that's a woman that was serving coffee. It's a bit of a...
Yeah.
So Big Baz gets a credit. Billy, who I'm assuming is that other guy from Ally Fraser.
Yeah.
And Pamela, Ally Fraser's secretary. And then the motel receptionist also gets a credit.
Yeah.
Pauline, whoever Pauline was, the Welsh rep from the conference and the East Anglia rep from the conference all get credits. So there we are, the end of the Return of the Seven. So that's the end of the Series 2, Episode 2, Episode 15. So that now tees us up for the job that they are to do on Thornley Manor. And we're about to encounter some fantastic new characters.
Arthur Pringle.
You just took the words right out of my life. Arthur Tiger Pringle, who's one of my popular favorites. And you know his real name is also
Brian Pringle,
Yeah. So so Arthur Tiger Pringle is about to make an appearance in the next episode. So yes, very much looking forward to that. So the scene has been set. The lads are back together and they're about to embark on their new job. So, if you would like to comment on anything that we have spoken about in this episode, if you have any advice, constructive criticism, and or / abuse, please do feel free to email the podcast on Auf Wiedersehen Again @gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram @Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast or Twitter @Auf Again. Like and share the Facebook page of Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And please do subscribe and click the bell on the YouTube channel of Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Or if you just prefer audio, please go to any good podcast platform, Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, Google, Breaker, and many, many more. New episodes are released every Friday at 10 a.m. and our theme music is composed and performed by the guitar man, Mr. Lee Dosky. So please, please, please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast and tell your friends. Remember, we are sponsored by Top Gun Tattooing, number 12, the Harris Arcade in Running. That's topguntattoo.co.uk. That's audible 189 968 667. You get a 20% discount with Zach by quoting the code Halloween Shiteman. And remember, free Neville and Lottie tattoo for every single listener. I don't know why I keep saying the word reader. I don't know where I've got that from. But, so, that is the end of episode 2, series 2. So please do feel free to give us some feedback. Remember, we've got the giveaway as well. Remember, we are doing our new giveaway for the official picture, which is a signed copy picture of the from series 3. And if you would like to win that, remember the giveaway is on the social media channels. So until next week, young George.
Yeah.
Episode next week is episode series 2, episode 3. But until next week, George. Auf Wiedersehen Pet.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Oh, yeah, man. All out of options, nothing to choose. I pissed out on Netflix, I'm sick of the news. I'd sign up to Sky.